if evolution was true, you would have to explain how that happens. And
you wouldn't.
To argue it.
Why would you have to do that? If we go back to one thing we do agree on, which is the nature of science itself, we do agree on that.
No, we don't.
We agree, don't we? Well, what do you think science?
Greetings, friends. I've been meaning to put out this video because it's been some time now that JimBob debated Edward Dutton, or the Jolly Heretic, on the Modern Day Debate channel hosted by Dr. James Kunz. In that debate, JimBob wrecked Ed Dutton. It was atrocious. Edward Dutton said some ridiculous things. I want to highlight those here. It's been difficult to go over the debate, even though it was only about an hour long. It's difficult to isolate segments because you want to give proper context. So I will play some of the debate here, maybe a few minutes at a time, to give you the proper context, because one thing flows into the next. It's actually kind of difficult to just cut people off and decide where to do the editing. But I want to give my own feedback here. But the biggest takeaways are that Edward Dutton said about 3 to 4 absolutely ridiculous things, or he admitted to some really ridiculous stuff that anyone from his status should know better not to say. Even if they believe in evolution, they should know better not to say these things. He said that everything's an assertion. He said that there's no such thing as two models that are consistent with the data. Only one model can be consistent with the data. I'm paraphrasing. When he was asked by JimBob whether it was advantageous that scientists had manipulated fruit flies in a laboratory to go blind or to have other defects in other animals, Ed Dutton's response was, it doesn't matter if it's advantageous. I'm just giving you the highlights. We're going to break it down, of course. I'm just giving you the biggest takeaways. I'd say probably the biggest thing, the most outrageous thing Ed Dutton said in that roughly hour to hour and 15 minute debate was around 44 minutes in, when JimBob was questioning him, as JimBob did basically take control of the debate in his line of questioning. And JimBob asked, prefacing it with, you believe that evolution is a series of random mutations over time that produce hyper-specialized mechanisms like the liver. If evolution was true, you would have to explain how that happens. And Edward Dutton says, no you don't, no you wouldn't. And then JimBob's almost surprised, and he says, if you're going to argue that that's the case, you're going to have to justify the argument. And Ed Dutton says, rubbish. Like, what the heck is going on here? Oh my goodness, it was a very bad showing for the Jolly Heretic. And Ed Dutton is someone who I've watched a fair bit of his videos over the years. I'm not a regular follower of his, but he's produced some good content over the years, usually some short 15 to 20 minute videos on particular topics. He's in the realm of psychology, or what he would call, I guess, evolutionary psychology. And he describes the leftist mindset and personality types and how different psychologies behave differently in society. And he had a very good video on disproving mouse utopia, which even people among us on the right use the example of mouse utopia as an example of an experiment that showed that society will become degenerate when there's abundance. But actually, as Ed Dutton correctly points out in that video, and that was a fraud. Mouse utopia was a fraud. And he has a very rigorous attitude to what constitutes science when he's discussing that video, but he doesn't have the same rigorous attitude when it comes to defending evolution, because evolution is really just a philosophy, not a very good one. Edward Dutton had also appeared not long before he did this appearance on Modern Day Debate with JimBob. Maybe less than a week previously, he had appeared on Academic Agent's channel, where they had a friendly discussion, kind of a debate, but not so uncomfortable like the exchange with JimBob, where they discussed the question of whether there would be civil war in England, which is beyond the scope of this video. I mean, there won't be. And that's what academic agent argued. There won't be, for reasons A, B, C, D, whatever. We don't need to get into that here. You can go watch the video. I'll provide a link to it. And Edward Dutton lost. He lost that debate, but it was a friendly exchange, so he didn't get embarrassed. There wasn't any moderator, but AA handled him with kid gloves and was gracious with him. He's just setting out in the debate world and he doesn't have the necessary experience. I wouldn't have that experience. But also you have to be comfortable being put in the hot seat from time to time, because sometimes you have to force someone to answer certain questions and there's no comfortable way to do that. That doesn't mean that people need to get upset. That doesn't mean that people have to leave the debate with a bad feeling. JimBob debates frequently. I think JimBob is probably the most popular or experienced online debater against evolution. JimBob is not an orthodox apologist. He's not in that camp, but he is orthodox. But in terms of debating evolution, he's among the premier people on the internet doing that right now. He's debated dozens of them. It takes a lot of stamina and a bit of a thick skin to do it. Edward Dutton didn't know what he was getting into. He thought he was going to be led into a friendly discussion. So maybe that's the fault of the moderator, James Kunz, who arranged it. But the channel is called Modern Day Debate. And I believe the prompt was something about like examining evolution or seeing what the problems are with evolution or what the defense could be. So obviously it was going to be about examining problems with evolution, but later Edward Dutton didn't like how rigorous JimBob was being and really putting him to the test. And James, the moderator, didn't do a good job. He derailed it several times, which indirectly helped Edward Dutton. I'm not saying James intended to do that, but that's what ended up happening because he derailed it several times and spoke about how, oh, you guys are all really just the same. You're on the same page. And really, you agree on 90% of everything. And I'm thinking to myself, what? I mean, they obviously don't. I understand you may want them to come back to your channel and be on friendly terms. And there's nothing wrong with a healthy masculine debate. But Ed was getting upset, and I guess James didn't like that. So he stepped in several times, and it completely derailed JimBob's line of questioning. Now, sometimes JimBob got back to the line of questioning successfully. But it was ridiculous for James to do that, and also to throw in these things about, you guys are really on the same side completely. Okay, just because they don't like the left and are vaguely on the right, that doesn't mean that they can't have a rigorous debate. So there's my basic rundown. I want to break it down a bit more. We can check out some of what was actually said in this debate.
I hold to a pretty strict definition of the scientific method. So you start with an observation, and then your next step is asking a question, which will give you a hypothesis. So can you tell me from the scientific view what the observation is and what the hypothesis is?
You said that over a long period of time, you can say that. That is the whole point of the model, that you have a very small change, and that is followed by other small changes and other small changes. And naturally, over a long period of time, those small changes will build up.
That's an assertion.
That's not an assertion at all.
That's absolutely an assertion.
How have you grown your beard?
How I can grow my beard over a week and repeat it, whereas you can't repeat your assertion. I can repeat mine. No, you can't.
I don't even know what that means.
Look, you just said, I'll give you your assertion back, Ed. You just said there, back in deep time, there's a rudimentary element of, let's say, an eye and the cells of what an eye becomes, right? It's reactive, it's sensitive to light, right? Over time, you're saying these small little changes. Yes. It's reasonable for you to say these small little changes over time that are from random mutations, which are rare to produce anything functional, by the way, by your own admission. Yeah, but that's hold on. Produce over long periods of time a more complex version of this hypersensitive light skin cells, right? But the thing is, that's an assertion. That right there is an assertion. And you're saying it's not. And you're saying it's not.
Well, anything is an assertion. Your assertion that it's an assertion is an assertion.
Assertions can Come on, assertions.
That's preposterous. That's not a position that you can follow. All I am saying is that the hypothesis is that small things build up over long periods of time.
That's an assertion. How do you know that?
All right, fine. It's an assertion, but it's an assertion that's born out of the data. How do you know it?
It's your claim. How do you know some small things that are simple build up to very complex things over time? How do you know that?
I don't know that they do, but we can.
Why are you saying it?
Because we can track evidence of it across species where this has happened.
Where is the evidence that small things...
As I said to you earlier, in laboratory conditions, we can track evolutionary processes occurring, and we can see and track back how they've built up over time, because we can manipulate them to do so. So we can see this process happening in real time in the laboratory. So it's not an assertion, it's an observation of empirical reality.
So there it is, around 27 minutes. Edward Dutton is talking about the basic explanation of evolution, and JimBob says, well, that's an assertion. And he says, no, it's not. And then you notice, I had to leave it play a little bit, that within a few minutes, he backpedals and he says, well, everything's an assertion. So you agree with what JimBob was saying, but you disagreed with him. But now you say in an accommodation evasion that, well, everything's an assertion. But if everything's an assertion, then you can't make distinctions between justified and unjustified claims. So no, not actually everything is an assertion. There's a reason we have the distinction between the two. There's nothing wrong in itself with making assertions, we do that, but that in itself is not adequate for the scientific method. It's remarkable that Ed would say something like, everything's an assertion. He's implicitly scoffing at the idea of properly following the scientific method.
No, you observe something at a micro level of an organism, hold on, doing something in response to stimuli. You know what that is? Hold on.
No,
all that, let me finish. I let you talk. You keep interrupting me.
The whole presupposition is wrong.
Hold on. So you just said, what do you observe in the laboratory?
I've explained to you. In the
Tell me, specifically.
I've just said to you, I've given you examples of fruit fly or whatever that have gone blind across time that in the dark.
Is that advantageous?
It doesn't matter whether it's advantageous.
Oh, really?
The question is whether it occurs and by what process it occurs. You can have, in certain environments where there's not particularly great Darwinian selection pressure, adaptations that later turn out to be disadvantageous. Evolution doesn't move in a direction. Evolution is random.
It's random. So your own thinking is random.
What does that mean?
It doesn't matter whether it's advantageous, responds the Jolly Heretic. Yeah, but I thought the story we were told was that these mutations led to advantages. But I guess, oh, well, no, actually, we're not there yet, because you had to have more random stuff going on before we could say that it's advantageous. So then you just saw something that was a mutation, which is usually almost always detrimental to the creature.
If everything that's biologically produced from evolution is produced from random events, then is it follow that your brain was produced by random events?
The mutations are going to be random mutations.
Answer the question, please. I asked you a direct answer. No, I asked you an actual really sharp question here, Ed, and you're dodging it.
I don't know what the question is.
Listen to my question. If it's true that evolution produced all of the mechanisms in the body, from the intestines to the liver to the heart to the brain, and you said it's produced from random processes with no direction, are you admitting that your own thinking is the process of a random process?
I am admitting, I'm happy to talk about that.
Can you just answer the question?
No, I'm not going to be snapped at.
Oh, now you're tone policing. I asked you a direct question, okay? If it's true that evolution produces things like the brain and the eye from random processes, then your brain right now in operation is the effect of a bunch of random things.
Okay, it's not tone policing. If we're going to have a discussion, then the discussion will be...
Are you going to answer the question?
Interrupting.
Hold on one second.
No, the discussion will be done politely, and what you call tone policing is what I would call basically a form of fallacious.
Just answer my question.
I won't just answer the question. I won't just answer. I won't be boss.
I won't.
Okay, forgive me, guys. I just want to jump.
This is pretty bad for Ed Dutton. He just said evolution is random. So JimBob asks him, is your own brain the result of a random process? He couldn't handle this question. He could not answer whether his own brain, and therefore his thinking, is dependent on or is the result of random processes. Why is that a hard question to answer? And I think maybe the reason is they know that that starts leading down the road to what are we doing debating? We're trying to get at the truth. To get at the truth, we have to use our faculties. We have to use our thinking. But if your faculties and your thinking can have ultimately no direction because they rest on things which have no direction, they rest on random processes, then how are you supposed to get to the truth when to think is produced by mere random, purposeless effects? It's a problem to explain thinking, in other words. It's a problem to explain what are we even doing in having a debate if you admit that your brain is the result of random effects. So perhaps that's why Ed didn't want to engage with the question, or maybe just he hadn't been asked that question before and found it annoying, but he got upset, and James, the moderator, stepped in. He redirects them to talk about the fossil record. So he totally shifts to a different topic, and they never return to this question of whether your brain is produced by random, whether your thinking is produced by random events. They never return to it. So this would be a major dodge by Ed.
You found something old, and it looks like something, some in between one thing you know and another thing you know. That's an observation, correct?
It may well be an observation, but it's not relevant to my point.
It is, because
No,
what
it's
you're
not.
doing, yeah, I'll tell you how. You're making an observation of similarity, and then you're saying, well, look, this thing looks like this other thing we have today, and if we can find another thing in the past that looks similar to that, we can draw out and extrapolate, interpolate a story that one thing led to the other, and that's what you're saying, right? You're saying
No.
that it is what you're saying.
No, it's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if you have a hypothesis whereby there are entirely separate organisms, then there would be nothing that would be in between those organisms in the distant past that no longer
That doesn't
exists
follow.
today.
That doesn't even follow.
I know, but I haven't finished the point. I'll just repeat myself because it's not whether it follows or it doesn't follow. The point is, the hypothesis of creationism is that there are separate groups that are in whatever you want to call, whatever model it is.
Who
that you're
said
expounding.
anything about that? We're
One
talking
second.
about
I
your
do wanna-
model.
Oh, no,
One
that's
sec.
very interesting. No, let's talk about that then. So what is your model then? Tell me.
I don't have a model. You're affirming evolution, and I'm poking holes because I think the view of evolution, absent an alternative explanation or storyline, I don't need another storyline to poke holes in evolution.
The most Dutton could do during the debate was his insistence that JimBob provide a better theory, a better explanation of where all the animals and creation came from. Implicitly saying that, you should argue for creationism then, so I can poke holes in that. But of course, that wasn't the terms of the debate. Anyone who has a familiarity with the basics of logic should know that when you're putting an idea to the question, like let's examine idea A to see if it makes sense, it does not follow that the other person can say, well, are you saying that idea B is more sound? That simply does not follow. That's not what you set out to do. So that's a logical fallacy, Dr. Ed Dutton. However, it's good rhetoric. It does work. So that's some musketry across the surface level of JimBob's ship, but that's not going to change the battle. You can have other debates, of course, where you do have the Christian worldview competing, but that's not always sensible to do that. You can have other debates just examining the Christian story.
Is there any other organism or item in the world, a food, something that's not human in the human category, that's dissimilar, but it's related to a human?
Dissimilar but related to a human. Yeah, probably. I mean, I can't think of the top of my head, but probably.
Like
yeah,
a banana. A banana is related to a human, right?
Well, obviously, but very distantly.
Okay, but if a banana is related, but it's dissimilar, you can't rest on similarity between things visually, phenotypically, skin, shape, skull.
Well, you clearly and conspicuously can, because a banana, as I have just said, is as extraordinarily dissimilar genetically from a human as pretty much anything you could imagine.
But it's our ancestor, right? It's a type of ancestor.
It's absolutely not our ancestor.
Is it a relative?
Well, it's a relative in the sense that all life
is it older than us?
I can't answer that.
You don't know if a banana is older than us.
I would imagine it is, but I can't answer that with certainty because it depends on what banana you're talking about.
I understand.
What banana over time, so I can't answer that.
A banana is related to a human, right? Well, obviously, but very distantly. That could have been something that could have provided more damage to Ed Dutton if JimBob had perhaps worked it slightly, but it didn't work in that case because Ed Dutton had a quick response and deflected it into, he loves to talk about intelligence and psychology, and he was talking about, well, intelligence. He did still admit that humans are related to bananas, so a banana is your relative.
You believe that random mutation produces hyper-specialized mechanisms like a liver over time, over a long period of time, right? If evolution was true, you would have to explain how that happens. And
you wouldn't.
To argue it.
Why would you have to do that?
If you're going to argue that it's the case, you're going to have to justify the argument.
Rubbish.
Oh, you don't have to justify arguments now?
You do not have to explain how. You can make a hypothesis and you can propose that something has happened. That's your hypothesis.
Cool. It didn't happen.
There's no reason to. It's not inherent in that you must explain how.
Cool. It didn't happen.
No, that's not what I said.
I'm saying it didn't happen. I don't have to justify that it didn't happen.
Well, fine. Actually, what interests me more, to be honest, is that you've said that you're not a creationist. So I'm really interested to know genuinely, what is your view?
My view of the world is irrelevant to whether or not evolution can defend itself from cross-examination.
No. Well, first of all, I just said I haven't come on here for something to be cross-examined, and I wouldn't have come on here for absolutely, and I wouldn't have come on here if that were the case. My understanding is that I was coming on here for a friendly discussion about problems with evolution or whatever.
Sure.
You seem to be treating no, it's not sure, because you seem to be treating it like it's some sort of trial.
You just contradicted yourself. If you said, "Can I talk?" I just let you talk.
JimBob asking Ed, do you believe in random mutation, producing hyper-specialized mechanisms like the liver, producing liver over time, over a long period of time? If evolution was true, you would have to explain how that happens. No, you don't. No, you wouldn't. Why would you have to do that? And JimBob, he's heard a lot of responses from atheists, but even he must have been kind of surprised to hear this. And he's saying, well, if you're going to argue that that's the case, you're going to have to justify the argument. Rubbish, says Jolly Heretic. Rubbish. You don't have to justify arguments now, JimBob says? And would you believe it? He doubles down. He says, no, you do not have to explain how. You can make a hypothesis and propose that something has happened. And then JimBob says, cool, it didn't happen. And this went right over the head of Ed. So using your logic, I say it didn't happen because I propose that something has happened. I form a hypothesis and propose that something has happened. Okay, so I propose it didn't happen. Evolution didn't happen. I don't have to justify it, as JimBob says. And then Ed says, fine. What interests me more is your view. What do you mean fine? Is this the second or the third case where JimBob has now said something, Jolly Heretic contests it, and JimBob clarifies, and Ed agrees? Well, hold on. Why are you agreeing? What do you mean fine? You just said rubbish. You just said rubbish a few minutes ago. And now you're saying fine. What interests me is your view. Do you have a better explanation? Well, how about an explanation that's justified? Maybe not one that's just asserted, if everything's just an assertion. So we could live in a virtual reality where nothing is real. It's just isn't that similar to living in an illusion? Because everything could just be an assertion. And then JimBob says, my view of the world is irrelevant to whether evolution can defend itself from cross-examination. And that word, cross-examination, kind of triggered Ed Dutton. I haven't come on here to be cross-examined. So he gets upset, and again, James the moderator intervenes and derails.
Gentlemen, forgive me, but I do want to just be sure, is that
this is going to get nowhere.
there's significant overlap in terms of your guys' positions. This is actually, though I think evolution is it's a large topic, of course, but there's so much agreement between you two that I don't want to miss the forest for the trees.
What do you mean miss the forest for the trees? What do you think we're presently doing? We're presently getting to the bottom of things, and you're saying we're missing the forest for the trees? And what are you talking about them having all this in common? How? I haven't seen that. Edward Dutton is an atheist. JimBob is an orthothug. Who cares that they both dislike the world of the modern left, the progressives? Probably most of the world doesn't like the modern left.
If we go back to one thing we do agree on, which is the nature of science itself, we do agree on that.
No, we don't.
We agree. Well, we agree, don't we? Well, what do you think science? What is science?
Science, I told you, is a very specific method. And so that's why I asked you if you're going to try to bring evolution through science and say, we both agree on science. Well, no, we don't, because from my view, a scientific theory is only the product of the scientific method. And when I ask, what's the observation? I can't even get it. Every time I debate this with someone, I can't even get the evolution proponent to give me a single observation that then leads to a hypothesis, ever.
Well,
and I try to do it.
I gave you a whole series of them. I showed you habits of real time, and you dismissed that as eugenics, which is not. It's just eugenics. There's no such thing as eugenics in this context. It's evolution. Eugenics is evolutionary processes. What I'm more interested in terms of science, is the question of a hypothesis.
Yeah.
People that criticize evolution say it's a hypothesis, as though that's a problem. All things in science are hypotheses. And the question is, they are models. They are models that best explain the data. And when new data comes along, which questions your model, then you have to revise your model and change your model and come up with a more nuanced and hopefully more accurate model. That is what it does. Can I finish? That is what it does. That's what it does. And so evolution, what scientists would say, is the best model that we currently have in comparison to other models. It's the model that explains the most information. They're not saying it's perfect. They're not saying there's not holes in it. So you can pick holes in it, but they're saying that it is a case, a different strands that come together and that most parsimoniously explain the available information. And so if a person has a problem with evolution, then what they are implicitly saying, I assume, is there is a better model. Then tell me what it is.
Well, no, that assumes that it's a valid model. I'm
it doesn't. No.
Can I just let you talk?
One sec.
Why are you so rude?
Really quick.
Because you're such an aggressive man.
Really okay.
Unbelievable, man.
I just want to jump in really quick. Pardon my. Is that is big picture wise, you guys agree on everything, almost everything, a lot.
It's the model that explains the most information. So that's his argument there. It's the model that explains the most information. He asks JimBob to provide a better model. And JimBob immediately says, that assumes that it's a valid model. And right there, he loses it. He's like, no. What the? I forgot about this moment. That might even be the worst moment for him. Like, okay, you're so fixated on models. Any model? A valid model. No. What do you mean? What do you mean, no? What are you talking about? No. This is the third instance where, he's saying no. Watch, he's going to agree. James intervenes almost immediately because sensing the rise in emotions, he intervenes immediately. But despite this, JimBob manages to get back on track.
If someone presents a hypothesis in science, Ed, isn't it fair that we question whether it's a viable hypothesis or not?
Yeah, that's fair enough to me.
Well, that's fair enough to me. Well, you just said no 2 minutes ago, and then you get to calm down a little bit. JimBob clarifies, and he says, that's fair enough to me. Well, what is that, the second or third time that this guy is basically contradicting himself repeatedly through this video? He doesn't even engage with what the scientific method is. He thinks it's just forming models and asserting things, making a hypothesis and proposing that something has happened. And that's where he leaves it. He just leaves it at that. He should know better, because when he was discussing Mouse Utopia, disproving that? Like, we all need it disproven for us because we're infected with that idea. Where's the rigor?
My point is that all that science is saying, and I'm sorry if things get a bit sort of tetchy a minute ago, I didn't mean that to happen, but all it's saying is that it's the hypothesis. When you have a hypothesis, it doesn't happen to be evolution, it can be anything. We will say this hypothesis is the most parsimonious model for explaining the available data. That is what is being proposed. Now, you can say it's a bad hypothesis. You can say there's all kinds of problems with this hypothesis. You can present all kinds of holes with it and problems with it. But then really what you're saying is it is not the best hypothesis to explain the available data. And so the legitimate question is, okay, fine, what is? And then we can compare the two hypotheses and we can say which one explains more.
This hypothesis is the most parsimonious model for explaining the available data. Well, why though? We were asking why is it? If it's not the best hypothesis, you have to offer one that is better. Again, logical fallacy, no you don't, but that does work rhetorically.
How do you determine a hypothesis in science, in natural science, is viable or not?
I didn't really know that the word viable is quite the right word. Viable implies almost like something living or dead. All that is what you do is you say, this potentially explains this observation. So, for example, I said to you earlier about things, well, I mentioned the issue of vestigial things, vestigial tails, that obviously goosebumps, which are not an immune response, they are solely a response to fear, and that kind of immune response, not other immune responses, and many other examples. So you say, right, this explains this. The possibility that we have a common ancestor that had a body covered in hair explains goosebumps, or the possibility that we had a common ancestor that had a tail explains things like the cockings, or whatever it or wisdom teeth, whatever.
So, Ed, if the Toronto Blue Jays baseball team wear blue jerseys, which they do, I could form a hypothesis that that potentially explains why Lake Ontario is blue, why it appears to us as blue. Because we have data, we have the team members, they wear blue jerseys, we can record every day. Yeah, they're still wearing the blue jerseys, at least when they play certain games. We have the time when they play, and we know where the jerseys come from. We can verify that it's blue dye. We have lots of people that can attest to this because all the fans see them wear blue jerseys. We've got lots of data. So my hypothesis is that these blue jerseys potentially explain why Lake Ontario is blue. We can testably verify that Lake Ontario remains blue every day. It's a testable hypothesis. Now, is there a better model? Of course, he would say, yeah, there's a better explanation. It's absurd what I'm talking about. But you see, for most of it, when he's talking about evolution, that's sufficient for him. When you press him on it, he'll say, oh yeah, well, of course, that in itself doesn't explain it, and you need to do a comparison. You need to, have a controlled experiment where you put something in, remove it, so you can really compare what's going on. Of course, with evolution, you really cannot do these sorts of experiments. Doing something in a lab is not the world at large, and even so, you could never produce new species in a lab. You could just damage them, make a two-headed mouse, make a blind fruit fly. Not even advantageous, as he admits.
Do you even believe that for something to be considered a theory under natural science, that it at least should be brought through the scientific method? Do you agree with that?
Yes, the scientific method is that you observe empirical reality and that you theorize a model to explain what you are presented with, and that model is compared to other possible models, and it is the most reasonable hypothesis at a given time with the available data. That is all it is.
That's a scientific method to you?
That is the best approximation. Perhaps you're going to nuance it more of what science involves. It's observation of reality in which you interpret into a model.
Okay, cool. So
over-reliance on models is a problem with science today. Everything that happened during COVID was justified based on models. Now, we now know that these models were absolutely fraudulent, but they had plenty of data that they were using, and they were charts and numbers and predictions, and they were real models that we trusted, and it all ended up to be BS. So you should be very wary about putting models prominently in your approach to science. The models have their place.
Models aren't actually the arbiter between two competing scientific hypotheses in natural science. But so if they were, you'd be able to tell me there's two people, they have the same data, they have all the same data available. One draws up a model that's consistent with the data, another draws up a model consistent with the data.
Well, no, they don't.
What do you mean?
It's
I'm giving
you can't have two models. You can't have two models that are consistent with the data.
No, they don't. No, they don't. You couldn't accept that. Now, I guess it depends on the word consistent. What do you mean consistent? Maybe for Dutton, he means, well, it must imply that it's involving a controlled experiments. But it sounds absolutely ridiculous to say that you can't have two models consistent with the same data. Like I just pointed out during COVID, they had faulty models that were using the same statistics. The question of trusting the statistics is another problem.
Well, you can't have two models that are consistent with the data.
Really?
No.
Really?
Yes, really.
So look,
Either one model, then they're the same model, aren't they?
So for him, to have a model consistent with the data, any other model would be the same model. To be consistent with the data is only possible for one model. Only one model can explain the data? That just doesn't sound right. I mean, okay, what do I know? Maybe I'm wrong here, but it sounds a little fishy.
A model is going to make testable predictions based on the available data. You can call that an experiment if you want. I'll just call it. I think that's just a matter of what word you choose to use in a given circumstance.
What? So now an experiment and model are the same thing?
The idea is that a model makes testable predictions about something, and a different model will make slightly different testable predictions. And then we see which one has the correct is the correct model based on what predictions are borne out and what are not.
Okay, cool. So I observe what I call scurvy, right? Between two groups of people. One doesn't get scurvy and one does. Before I know what scurvy is, it's just symptoms, right? And I have data, right? I have available data, and I drop a model that X causes scurvy, and someone else has the same exact data in front of them, and they say Y causes scurvy. You're saying that's an example of two people having the same exact information and data and have different assumed causes, models, assumed causes for the effect. The only arbiter from my view in the scientific method is that you introduce what you assume is causing scurvy and you remove it. That's called an experiment. But from your view, you didn't say experiment.
No, I agree with you completely. No, I agree with you.
So you agree that an experiment is necessary now?
I think that I was using other words that kind of mean experiment.
Model.
Well, a model that makes testable predictions. How do you test those predictions? You have what you might call an experiment. So I've no problem with that at all.
So then what the heck were you saying earlier, Ed? For the third or fourth time, I forget. He's just going back on himself, making himself like a fool. What are you doing? I don't know how it's possible for someone of his status to say these things. I really hope some of his followers bug the Jolly Heretic to address these insane fallacies, these insane statements he made. That's 3 or 4 completely outrageous things that no one from his training should be making. And as for JimBob, I mean, much respect to him. He did a fine job. He won the battle that the Jolly Heretic didn't want to be a battle, and we can all feel sorry for Jolly Heretic.
Yeah,
so no, I don't disagree with you at all on that. No.
Okay, but I'm saying you can actually draw models, and you don't have to do an experiment because a model isn't identical to an experiment.
But then it's meaningless. It's a meaningless thing to do. For them,
yes,
I agree with you completely. To create a model.
If you're a history nerd of the 18th century, JimBob had a carronade broadside at close range on Dutton's battleship early on, around the 27-minute mark, with the assertion back and forth. That I would liken to a cannonball smashing through Dutton's ship at the waterline. His insistence that JimBob provide a better theory, a better explanation of where all the animals and creation came from. So that's some musketry across the surface level of JimBob's ship, but that's not going to change the battle. But I mean, really, later on when he makes that comment about not having to justify claims, that's like your powder magazine exploding in the belly of your ship. And then you already knew the battle was won, but the debate is over at that point. And 44 minutes in, it's over. His ship is exploded. His crew is lost. Hasta luego, amigos.